It was February 14, 2021, at precisely 8:47 a.m., in the quiet suburb of Maplewood, New Jersey. The morning air was crisp, a thin layer of frost coating the lawns and glistening in the early sunlight, as though nature itself had paused in reverence or warning. In the modest two-story home on Cedar Lane, 25-year-old Emily Sanders sat at her kitchen table, phone in hand, fingers trembling slightly as she tapped out a text that would become the last anyone would ever receive from her. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Love you," she wrote, oblivious that within mere hours her life would be shattered, her presence erased, and her family would begin a desperate search that would grip the community in fear and disbelief. Outside, the neighborhood seemed calm, almost serene, but inside Emily's house, tension hummed under the surface. Her boyfriend, Jonathan Miles, a 28-year-old aspiring musician with a charming smile and an unpredictable temper, was already in the garage, tuning his guitar, unaware, or perhaps uncaring, of the storm about to descend. To the world, Jonathan was charismatic, well-liked among friends, and seemingly devoted, but those who knew the couple intimately had witnessed the subtle cracks, the whispered arguments, the veiled threats that had, until that morning, been carefully hidden behind shared laughter and loving gestures. Emily's morning had begun like any other. She had brewed her favorite vanilla latte, hummed softly to herself as she prepared breakfast, and glanced out the window at the frost-lined streets. Her mind, however, was restless. She had felt, for weeks now, a subtle tension in her relationship, a suffocating undertone she couldn't shake. Jonathan had been distant, sometimes cold, other times inexplicably jealous over trivial matters. But Emily, ever hopeful and committed, had brushed these feelings aside, telling herself that love often comes with tests and that, eventually, their bond would smooth over the rough edges. That morning, she had texted Jonathan with warmth in her words, laughter in her emojis, and hope in her heart, completely unaware that the day's events would transform that hope into horror. By 9:15 a.m., Emily received a response from Jonathan, a simple, "I can't wait either." The brevity of the message should have been a warning, a signal that something was off. But Emily, seeing the heart emoji and recalling their past moments of tenderness, smiled faintly, her mind momentarily at ease. She placed the phone down, walked over to the window, and breathed in the cool February air, feeling the faint sun warm her cheeks. Outside, the street was quiet, only a few cars passing, neighbors beginning their day. The world seemed ordinary, peaceful even, yet within the walls of Emily's home, fate had already begun to weave its dark thread. At 10:03 a.m., the first sign that something was amiss appeared. A neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, glanced out her window and noticed Jonathan's truck parked in the driveway, engine idling, long after he had claimed he was heading to a rehearsal. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. After all, small lapses in timing were nothing unusual for Jonathan. Emily, unaware of the silent scrutiny outside, had gone to her bedroom to straighten up, humming a soft tune. She passed by the mirror and paused, catching a glimpse of herself. Her hair was slightly messy, a strand falling across her forehead. Her reflection smiled back, bright, trusting, and entirely unsuspecting of the darkness about to arrive. By late morning, Jonathan had returned unexpectedly, carrying a small bouquet of roses, their petals dewy and vibrant, meant as a Valentine's surprise. Emily's smile widened at the sight, relief and happiness flashing across her face. She accepted the flowers, inhaling their sweet fragrance, setting them carefully on the kitchen counter. "You remembered," she said softly, her voice warm, almost breathless with affection. Jonathan nodded, a faint shadow flickering across his features. A brief, almost imperceptible scowl that vanished the instant she looked at him directly. Emily didn't notice, and even if she had, she would have forgiven it. That was who she was, forgiving, hopeful, endlessly loyal. Hours passed, and the afternoon sun crept lazily across the living room. Jonathan suggested they go for a walk, a quiet Valentine's afternoon stroll. Emily eagerly agreed, slipping on her coat and scarf. As they stepped outside, she felt the comforting weight of the roses still tucked under her arm, the crisp air filling her lungs, the world momentarily perfect. But the calm was deceptive. By 3:17 p.m., a series of events would shatter that illusion. The last text she would send, the one that now loomed like a ghost over her life, was drafted in her mind even as she smiled at Jonathan. "I love you, always." She hit send. The message flew into the digital ether, a final declaration of love that would soon be twisted by fear, violence, and betrayal. Just as the text was sent, Jonathan's demeanor subtly shifted. A glint in his eye, unnoticed by Emily, hinted at the darkness beneath his charming exterior. By 3:30 p.m., the couple had returned home, and what was supposed to be a cozy, love-filled Valentine's Day turned into a nightmare that would echo for years. Words were exchanged, harmless at first, then sharp, then cutting, the kind of words that leave invisible scars. Emily tried to calm the tension, her voice gentle, coaxing, begging for reason and understanding. Jonathan, however, seemed caught in an internal storm, his patience fraying, his temper unpredictable. By 3:45 p.m., the argument had escalated beyond words. And then it happened. The moment that would define the day, the event that transformed her last loving text into a haunting memory. A shove, a scream, a momentary struggle that turned fatal. Emily fell, and everything, her roses, her phone, the fragile hope she had carried, crumbled. The sound was muffled, a cruel echo of what had been a day meant for love. Alone, the neighborhood oblivious, Emily's life was extinguished in the space of seconds, leaving behind a chilling silence that would soon be broken only by the discovery of her absence. Her phone lay nearby, the screen still glowing with her last words, "I love you, always." That single text, innocent and pure in intent, would become the key evidence, the haunting memory for her friends and family, and the cornerstone of a case that would grip Maplewood and the nation in disbelief. The roses, now crushed, lay scattered, a vivid symbol of love betrayed, life stolen, and innocence shattered. From that moment, a desperate search would unfold. Her family, friends, and neighbors would scramble to piece together her final hours, tracing texts, phone locations, and witness accounts. Every message, every shadow, every glance Jonathan had made that morning would be scrutinized. The serene Valentine's morning had turned into a chilling puzzle of love, obsession, and murder.
Even now, as investigators pieced together her last movements, the haunting thought remained. The last words Emily had typed, expressing love and hope, had been met with violence and betrayal. And somewhere, in that quiet suburban street, the memory of that final text lingered, a testament to the fragile line between affection and obsession, love and death. If you're following this story and feeling the tension, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay with us as we uncover the full truth behind Emily's last Valentine's Day. You won't want to miss the next part of this gripping, emotional story. By 4:15 p.m., Emily Sanders' quiet home on Cedar Lane had descended into a scene of growing dread. The initial sounds of the struggle had faded, leaving only the faint echo of a door swinging shut and the soft hum of the heater. Outside, the late February sky was overcast, casting a gray pallor over the street, making the frost-coated lawns appear cold and unwelcoming. Neighbors began to notice Jonathan's lingering presence near the house, his figure still visible through the frosted windows, though his expression was unreadable, his movements deliberately casual. To the casual observer, nothing seemed amiss. Yet to Emily's closest friend, Lauren Mitchell, there was an uneasy sensation, a knot of worry tightening in her stomach. Something had gone terribly wrong. Lauren had been expecting to meet Emily later that evening for their planned Valentine's dinner. The two had joked for weeks about celebrating early, given the busy schedules that came with their respective jobs. Lauren had sent a text at 4 p.m. "Where are you? Can't wait to celebrate you." But unlike her previous messages, no reply came. Concern quickly escalated to anxiety. By 4:30 p.m., Lauren called Emily, receiving nothing but the cold ring of unanswered calls. The calm of the afternoon had transformed into a gnawing fear. She knew something was off. Not just the delay, not just the silence, but a profound, instinctive sense that Emily's laughter, her warmth, had been abruptly silenced. Meanwhile, within the house, Jonathan was attempting to mask panic with casual indifference. He moved slowly through the rooms, gathering items, pretending to tidy, but every so often pausing, glancing toward the bedroom where Emily had last been. The shadows of his own movements seemed longer than reality, distorted by the afternoon sun, now dipping behind the gray clouds. The roses Emily had cherished that morning now lay crushed on the kitchen floor, their petals darkened by the faint traces of spilled coffee, a stark symbol of innocence betrayed. By 5 p.m., Emily's father, Robert Sanders, began to grow anxious. Emily had promised him she would call after work, and while she was heading home, a routine they had maintained for years. Her absence now, combined with the unnerving lack of communication, drove him to action. He dialed Lauren, who confirmed her unease, and together they decided to go to Cedar Lane. The 15-minute drive from downtown Maplewood felt like an eternity. Each red light, each passing car, each minute amplified Robert's growing dread. He parked across the street and stared at his daughter's home, heart hammering, the creeping suspicion in his chest transforming into fear. Lauren was first to enter the house. The front door was unlocked, an unusual oversight given Emily's habit of keeping it secured. She called out, her voice tentative, almost desperate. "Emily, are you here?" The only response was the faint echo of her own voice bouncing off the walls. She cautiously stepped into the living room and noticed the crushed roses, the tipped-over mug, and the slight disarray of the kitchen. Panic set in. Something wasn't right. The warmth of the house, which had always been comforting, now felt stifling, almost suffocating. She moved toward the bedroom, where she froze. The door was ajar, the room empty, but the bedspread was ruffled as if someone had left in a hurry, or worse, been forced to leave. At that precise moment, Jonathan returned from the garage, acting calm, casual even, as though he had just been taking a walk. Lauren turned to him, alarm flooding her expression, but he merely smiled faintly, shrugging. "She went out for a bit," he said, voice smooth, too smooth. "She'll be back soon." But Lauren's instinct screamed otherwise. Something about the slight tremor in his hands, the shadow in his eyes, the unnatural ease with which he spoke. It didn't fit with the loving boyfriend he portrayed in texts and social media posts. By 5:30 p.m., Robert Sanders arrived, stepping into a home that no longer felt familiar. He scanned the rooms with rapid, meticulous eyes. His heart thudded painfully as he noticed the disarray, the knocked-over chair, the faint smudge on the windowsill, and the way the roses had been crushed as if someone had hastily shoved them aside. "Where's Emily?" he demanded, voice trembling. Jonathan's calm demeanor faltered ever so slightly, a micro-expression, barely noticeable, but enough to send Robert's suspicion soaring. I don't know," Jonathan replied, and the words, so simple and understated, were like acid in Robert's chest. Minutes stretched into agonizing hours. Lauren called 911, reporting Emily missing, citing the sudden absence, the signs of struggle, and the eerily calm but inconsistent explanations from Jonathan. Police arrived within 20 minutes, their sirens cutting through the quiet suburban evening. Officers canvassed the house, taking note of everything: the overturned chair, the crushed roses, the faint fingerprint smudges on the window, the coffee mug now lying face down. Each detail was carefully documented, each clue weighed against the others. Jonathan was questioned immediately, his calm demeanor now under scrutiny. Detectives noted his inconsistencies, timelines that didn't add up, statements that shifted slightly under pressure, and an uneasy tension in his body language. While he had been articulate in claiming Emily had gone for a walk, the phone records began to tell a different story. Her last outgoing text, those simple, loving words, "I love you always," was still glowing on the phone screen in the kitchen, time-stamped at 3:17 p.m., hours earlier. That message, innocent and warm, now stood as a haunting epitaph for the day that had promised love but delivered terror. Outside, the neighborhood was transformed. Curious neighbors gathered, whispering theories, some attempting to offer comfort, others staring in morbid fascination. The police, meanwhile, began collecting evidence: her phone, her purse, any trace of her last movements. The faintest traces of struggle, unnoticed by all but the trained eye, hinted at the rapid escalation of events. The horror was slow to reveal itself, but every detail pointed toward one inescapable truth: Emily Sanders was no longer merely missing. Her life had been violently interrupted, leaving behind questions that demanded answers and a community gripped by disbelief.
As night fell, the search intensified. Flashlights swept the yards, doors were checked, and the streets grew eerily quiet save for the occasional murmur of officers and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. Emily's father, standing on the front porch with Lauren, felt a cold wave of despair crash over him. The roses, the laughter, the morning text, all now transformed into ominous markers of a life violently cut short. And somewhere, in the shadows of Maplewood, Jonathan watched, calm on the surface, but hiding secrets that, once uncovered, would shock everyone. If you're following this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you can stay with us as the investigation deepens and the chilling truth behind Emily's last Valentine's Day text comes to light. You won't want to miss what happens next. The night had settled over Maplewood like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Streetlights flickered intermittently, casting long, distorted shadows across the quiet neighborhood. In Emily Sanders' home, the police had begun a methodical sweep. Every room was meticulously examined, each piece of furniture, each personal item catalogued. Yet, as thorough as the search was, it was the subtler signs that began to speak the loudest. A chair slightly askew, a window that had been opened and then hastily closed, a faint smear on the carpet that didn't belong. It was as though the house itself was whispering secrets that only the trained eye could begin to piece together. Detective Helen Morris, a seasoned investigator with over 15 years on the force, crouched by the kitchen counter, examining the faint fingerprints smeared across the mug Emily had left behind that morning. She traced the curved lines slowly, her brow furrowed. These were no ordinary prints. They were fresh, and there was a second set, partial and muddled, overlapping Emily's own. Whoever had been here had done so in haste, yet deliberately enough to leave a signature of their presence behind. Helen's eyes flicked to Jonathan, who remained seated on the couch, hands clasped tightly in his lap, every muscle in his body taut as though he were ready to spring away at a moment's notice. By 7:30 p.m., Emily's phone had been recovered from the counter. It had not been moved far, but the content told a story that no one could ignore. Her last text to Jonathan, a simple, loving declaration, "I love you, always," was open and unsent messages lingered on the screen. One of them, incomplete, merely read, "I think I saw him." The ellipsis hung like a cliff over a chasm, an unfinished thought that seemed to scream for completion. Whoever had arrived in Emily's home that afternoon had not only disrupted her life, they had silenced her voice before she could even finish warning someone. The horror of it settled into the room like an invisible fog, chilling the air. Meanwhile, outside the house, neighbors began murmuring, their fear now punctuated by speculation. A young couple walking their dog slowed near the Sanders driveway, whispering about the police presence and the flashing lights. Some speculated a robbery. Others, with faces pale and hearts racing, suggested something far more sinister. Detective Morris had already noted the neighborhood's reactions and reminded herself that while public speculation often ran wild, the truth would emerge from facts, not fear. And yet, even she could not dismiss the sinking dread in her stomach, the feeling that this case would be more complex and far darker than anything she had encountered in years. Inside, Jonathan's composure began to fracture subtly. A faint twitch at the corner of his eye, a small swallow of air, a barely audible sigh, all imperceptible to most, but noticeable to the detectives who had seen deception in its smallest forms before. When Helen asked about Emily's last movements, his answers were precise, almost rehearsed, yet the inconsistencies began to reveal themselves under careful questioning. He claimed she had stepped out to pick up a gift for a friend, yet receipts, messages, and surveillance footage from nearby stores failed to corroborate his story. Each unanswered question, each gap in his timeline, felt like a drumbeat echoing louder in the minds of everyone in that house. By 8:45 p.m., the first real breakthrough arrived. One of the officers noticed something unusual near the side door, tiny, almost imperceptible drag marks on the snow-dusted porch leading toward the backyard. They were shallow but deliberate, as though someone had been forced or had struggled while being led or dragging something behind them. The detective's eyes locked on one another. Helen's voice was calm, but her tone carried a steel edge. This is no longer a simple missing person. This is a violent intrusion. We need every unit on perimeter. Jonathan's posture stiffened as the realization dawned. He could no longer control the narrative with words alone. Police dogs were called in, officers swept the property for forensic evidence, and the backyard, which had appeared serene and untouched, now revealed faint impressions in the damp grass. Something, or someone, had been moved quickly, but not without leaving traces. A thin thread of fear finally began to creep across Jonathan's composed face. For all his prior control, all his careful planning, it was now clear that the walls he had built around his actions were beginning to crumble under scrutiny. As midnight approached, Emily's father, Robert, sat outside the Sanders home, blanket around his shoulders, phone in hand. Each notification, each call from the police, each whispered report from officers heightened the pulse of despair in his chest. He thought of the simple text from that morning, the smile she had given him over the phone, the warmth in her voice. It was agonizing to reconcile that memory with the present terror, the unknown fate of his daughter, and the growing suspicion that someone he had trusted completely might have been involved in her disappearance. And then, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from Emily's messaging app. The screen illuminated the darkness. A new message had been sent, yet it had not come from Emily. It read, "She's gone. Don't look for her here." The words, stark and cold, cut through the night. Detective Morris felt the weight of the threat in the text, a deliberate attempt to mislead, manipulate, and instill fear. Every officer on site understood immediately, whoever was behind this had planned more than just a disappearance. They had orchestrated a carefully controlled moment of terror. As the scene grew colder and the night deeper, the detectives continued to piece together fragments of Emily's last hours. Surveillance footage from the neighborhood, receipts from nearby stores, and the faint trail left in the backyard all began forming a chilling map of her final movements. And somewhere, hidden within these clues, lay the truth, a truth that promised to shock, devastate, and reveal the darkness that had infiltrated what should have been a day of love and celebration. If you're following this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated. The twists and revelations in Emily's disappearance are only getting darker, and the next part will uncover secrets that no one saw coming. The first rays of dawn filtered weakly through the winter clouds, casting a gray pall over Maplewood that did nothing to lighten the heaviness in the air. The Sanders backyard, which had seemed ordinary just a day ago, now bore the marks of a violent struggle. Police tape crisscrossed the lawn, and officers moved with careful precision, eyes scanning for anything that might reveal the final moments of Emily's life. Detective Helen Morris stood at the edge of the yard, clipboard in hand, her gaze fixed on the faint impressions in the damp grass. Each indentation told a story of fear, resistance, and a final desperate attempt to escape. Inside, Jonathan remained under quiet questioning, his previously controlled demeanor fraying with every passing hour. The inconsistencies in his statements, once subtle, had now become glaring. Where he had claimed Emily left the house to meet a friend, surveillance footage from a convenience store 2 blocks away contradicted him completely. It showed him alone, carrying a small package, eyes darting nervously over his shoulder, as if checking for witnesses. The detectives exchanged knowing glances. This was the moment when pretense gives way to truth, when the careful facade of innocence begins to crumble under the relentless weight of evidence. Meanwhile, forensic teams examined Emily's phone and digital footprint. Every text, every social media interaction, every geolocation ping told a picture of her final hours. Her last Valentine's message, a simple yet heartfelt, "I love you," now bore an unbearable irony. The message she had sent that morning, filled with trust and hope, would be the last words she ever shared with the man she had loved. The data revealed a chilling timeline. Her phone had been moved without her consent after the message was sent, used to create confusion, to mislead friends, and to construct a false narrative of disappearance. Every tap, every delay, was a breadcrumb leading investigators closer to the horrifying truth. The breakthrough came when a neighbor reported seeing Jonathan's car parked near a secluded area in the woods just a mile from Emily's house. Investigators descended on the site cautiously. There, partially hidden beneath leaves and broken branches, lay a small, blood-stained scarf that belonged to Emily. The sight was devastating, the physical confirmation of violence casting a shadow over the entire neighborhood. Detectives knew immediately that the trail was no longer theoretical, it was tangible, cruelly real. Jonathan's eyes, when confronted with the evidence, betrayed the slightest flicker of fear, the barest recognition that his carefully constructed plan had failed. As officers pieced together the evidence, Jonathan finally began to speak, though not without resistance. His words were a mix of confusion, denial, and reluctant confession. He described an argument that had escalated far beyond control, a moment of rage that spiraled into irreversible tragedy. He claimed it had been an accident, a struggle that had gone too far, but the forensic evidence, combined with his own contradictory statements, told a story of calculated manipulation and betrayal. Emily's last hours, once full of hope and affection, had been replaced by terror and ultimately, betrayal at the hands of the person she trusted most. The courtroom later recounted these chilling details to the public. Friends and family testified, describing Emily as a woman full of life, warmth, and love. Jonathan's defense painted him as a young man who had acted impulsively, but prosecutors highlighted the deliberate steps he had taken, concealing the crime, moving Emily's belongings, and sending misleading messages to delay discovery. Each fact compounded the sense of betrayal, a narrative of trust violated in its most intimate and horrifying form. In the weeks following, Emily's memory became a beacon for the community. Candlelight vigils, social media tributes, and heartfelt messages poured in from friends who could not reconcile the loving young woman they knew with the horror of her final hours. Her story became a solemn reminder of the dangers that can lurk in seemingly ordinary relationships, and the heartbreaking reality that sometimes, the people we trust most are the ones capable of deepest betrayal. As the investigation concluded, law enforcement confirmed that the evidence against Jonathan was overwhelming. He was charged with murder and several counts related to obstruction and deception. In court, the prosecution laid bare the timeline, the phone records, and the digital breadcrumbs that led to his conviction. Justice, though painful and incomplete, brought closure to Emily's family and a measure of accountability for the community shaken to its core. And yet, even with the conviction, the echoes of Emily's final Valentine's text, simple, pure, filled with love, resonated far beyond the case itself. It was a stark, haunting reminder of how quickly love can turn into tragedy, trust into betrayal, and a day meant for affection into a day of horror. For those watching, following, or remembering Emily, the story became more than a cautionary tale. It became an emotional reckoning, a testament to the fragility of life and the importance of vigilance in the face of deception. If you're following this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to continue exploring these deeply emotional and shocking narratives. Emily's story is tragic, but remembering her and learning from it helps protect others from similar fates. The next story will uncover even more shocking truths about love, betrayal, and the hidden darkness behind ordinary lives.